Let's take a break. That's how she said it. Calm, casual, with that little smirk she used whenever she thought she had the upper hand. Her friends were there, sitting at the bar, pretending not to listen while watching every flicker of my reaction. I didn't give them one. I just looked at her, nodded once, and said, "Sure, a permanent one." Then I stood up, left a 20 under the glass, and walked out into the cold. It wasn't the words that hit me. It was the tone, the ease. Like our years together were just a season she could step out of when it didn't fit her mood. The door of the bar closed behind me, and the sound of her laughter, forced, too loud, echoed against the street. I remember thinking how strange it felt, realizing that someone could erase you before you even walked away. I didn't go home that night. I drove, past the city, past the noise, into the quiet stretch of highway where everything felt still. Somewhere between the glowing Shell sign and the black sky, I stopped feeling angry. What replaced it wasn't peace, it was detachment. The kind of silence that isn't empty, just done. When I finally got home the next morning, her perfume still hung in the hallway. A note sat on the counter. "I'll come by later for my things. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." I almost laughed. Harder for who? By afternoon, her text started. "You okay? Then, you don't want to talk?" By evening, it became 14 missed calls in a row. I answered once. Hours later, when the world was quiet again, my voice was steady. "Breaks don't include check-ins," I said. Then I hung up. That was the last time she heard my voice for weeks. The thing about silence is, people mistake it for weakness until it starts echoing back at them. She wanted a break because she thought I'd wait. She thought I'd linger like background noise, ready to resume when she was bored. What she didn't understand was that I wasn't pausing. I was done. That night, I sat on the couch, phone face down, Netflix humming in the background. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel revenge. I felt clarity. The kind that comes when you finally realize you've been auditioning for someone who already decided they didn't want the part you were playing. She wanted space. So I gave it to her, the kind she wouldn't know how to fill. The morning after I ended the call, the silence felt sharper. No messages, no sound of her voice echoing through the house. No trace of perfume in the hallway. Just quiet. For the first time in months, I could hear myself think. I poured a cup of coffee, stared out the kitchen window, and realized something strange. I didn't miss her. I missed the illusion of her. The version of her that used to care, before everything turned into games and pride. By noon, she broke the silence. A text. Short. "So that's it." I didn't reply. Then another. "You're really just walking away?" Still nothing. The third one came hours later. "You're acting like a child." That one made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. I'd spent years being the adult in the room. The one fixing, apologizing, absorbing her moods. The second I stopped, I became immature. That evening, I went for a drive. The streets were empty, the sky heavy with clouds. I parked near the lake and watched the reflection of city lights ripple across the water. My phone buzzed again, this time a call. I let it ring. She wanted me to react, to prove I still cared, to remind her she still had control. But silence was my answer, and it spoke louder than anything I could have said. The next morning, I went to work early. My coworkers noticed something different. They joked that I looked lighter. Maybe I was. When I got home, the house was just as I left it, clean, quiet, peaceful. Her key was still on the counter. She hadn't come for her things. Part of me knew why. She didn't want closure. She wanted attention. 3 days passed before she showed up. I was sitting on the couch watching Netflix, a half-empty bottle of Jack Daniels on the table. The door opened, and she stood there, pretending to be calm. Her voice was flat when she said she came to pick up her stuff. I nodded, said nothing, and went back to watching the screen. She hesitated, waiting for me to ask her to stay. When I didn't, she walked slowly toward the bedroom, her footsteps echoing in the silence. 20 minutes later, she was gone. But the air still smelled like her perfume, that same one she wore the night she said, "Let's take a break." The difference was, this time, I didn't feel the ache. I felt relief. She thought she could end things on her terms. But walking away quietly, that was mine. A week passed before I heard from her again. The quiet had become my routine, morning runs, black coffee, and nights spent scrolling through Netflix without ever hitting play. It was strange how fast the noise of another person fades when you stop feeding it. Then, one evening, I came home from work to find a box sitting outside my door. Her handwriting on the label stopped me cold. Inside were a few things I'd left at her place. A hoodie, an old Nike cap, and a note. It said, "You really don't care, do you?" No greeting, no signature. Just that. I put the box aside and didn't open it again. Because that was the point. She wanted me to respond. To show her she still mattered. She didn't understand that indifference is colder than anger. Anger burns, indifference freezes. And I was done burning. 2 days later, my friend Marcus called. He'd seen her out with some of her friends. The same ones who'd nodded approvingly when she said she wanted a break. He said she looked distracted, kept checking her phone every few minutes. He asked if I was okay hearing that. I told him I was fine. The truth? I was. She was chasing something that didn't exist anymore. The version of me who waited. By the weekend, the texts started again. "I've been thinking," she wrote. "Maybe we should talk." Then another. "I miss you." I read them, but my thumb didn't move. No reply. She called that night. 5 times. I didn't answer. On the 6th, she left a voicemail. Her voice cracked halfway through as she said she didn't mean for things to go this far, that she never thought I'd actually walk away. I listened once, then deleted it. That night, I sat on the balcony, the city lights flickering below, and realized something important. She didn't want me back. She wanted her comfort back. The assurance that no matter how far she pushed, I'd still be there. She wanted the version of me who filled her silence, who explained himself, who begged to be understood. That man was gone. The next morning, I blocked her number. Not out of spite, but because peace doesn't coexist with chaos. She taught me that. I finished my coffee, grabbed my keys, and stepped outside into the cold. The air felt sharper, cleaner, alive. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone trying to fix what was broken. I felt like someone who'd finally stopped breaking himself to keep someone else whole. Blocking her number was supposed to be the end of it. I thought silence would finally do what words never could. But quiet has a way of making people desperate. A week later, she started finding new ways to reach me. Emails, messages from mutual friends, even handwritten notes left at my office. One afternoon, my assistant handed me an envelope with my name written in her familiar cursive. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it, realizing how predictable this had become. She didn't want reconciliation. She wanted reaction, and I wasn't giving her that anymore. When I finally read it later that night, it wasn't an apology. It was nostalgia weaponized. "Remember the night at the cabin?" she wrote. "You said you'd never give up on us. I guess forever meant something different to you." I folded the paper neatly, dropped it in the trash, and kept scrolling through my Netflix queue. There was a strange power in letting things stay unanswered. A few days later, I ran into one of her friends at a Starbucks downtown. She smiled awkwardly and asked how I was holding up. I said I was fine. Then she lowered her voice and said, "You know she's been struggling, right?" I shrugged. "We all do," I replied and walked away. I didn't know anyone my guilt anymore. That night, I got another email. This one different. Shorter. Colder. "I hope you're happy," it said. "You turned me into the villain." I almost laughed. Because that was the truth she couldn't handle. There was no villain, no hero. Just two people who stopped recognizing each other. The difference was, I accepted it. She still needed someone to blame. As days passed, her messages slowed, then stopped entirely. The silence she once used as punishment had finally come for her. I could almost picture her, phone in hand, waiting for a reply that would never arrive. That's the thing about people who play with distance. They always think they control when it ends. One evening, I walked by the same bar where she'd first said, "Let's take a break." The music, the laughter, even the smell of whiskey in the air, it all felt like a memory from someone else's life. I stood there for a moment, then kept walking. No nostalgia, no ache, just calm. Because in the end, peace doesn't come when someone apologizes. It comes when you no longer need them to. And that was my quiet revenge, the kind that doesn't destroy, but transforms. 2 months after she said, "Let's take a break," I stopped counting the days. Her name no longer appeared on my screen. Her voice no longer echoed in the back of my mind. I thought that meant it was over. But endings don't always arrive with silence. Sometimes, they come disguised as coincidence. It happened on a Friday evening. I'd just left the gym, Nike duffel over my shoulder, Spotify shuffling through an old playlist we used to share. I stopped at a small restaurant near downtown, a place we used to visit on slow Sundays. I didn't plan it. I just wanted dinner. The universe had other plans. She walked in minutes later. Alone. No smirk this time. No crowd of friends. Just her. Tired, pale, eyes searching the room until they landed on me. She froze. Then walked over, hesitant. I didn't move. When she spoke, her voice was soft, unsteady. She said she didn't expect to see me there. I told her neither did I. We stood there for a moment that stretched too long. Then she asked if she could sit. Against my better judgment, I nodded. She talked. About her new job, how things hadn't been easy, how she missed us. She said she realized she'd taken me for granted, that she thought I'd always be around. I listened, not out of curiosity, but out of closure. Every word felt like a rerun of a show I'd already stopped watching. When she paused, waiting for me to respond, I finally spoke. I told her that I wasn't angry, and I wasn't holding on to anything. But I also told her that I wasn't coming back. The look on her face was something I hadn't seen before, understanding. Not guilt, not manipulation. Just the realization that I meant it. She tried to smile, but her eyes gave her away. She said she wished she'd never asked for that break. I told her the break wasn't the problem. It was everything that led to it. She nodded, silent. Then she whispered, "You really changed." I said I had to. We parted quietly. No scene, no lingering words. As I walked out into the cool night, I looked back once. She was still sitting there, staring at the empty chair across from her. And that's when it hit me. The most powerful revenge isn't absence or anger. It's peace. The kind that leaves the other person wondering how you moved on without them. After that night, something in the air shifted. She didn't reach out again, not right away. But silence has a strange rhythm. It fades, then returns, testing the boundaries you've built. About 2 weeks later, I got a message from an unknown number. "I heard your company's expanding. Congratulations." No name, but I didn't need one. It was her. I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen for a moment, then placed the phone face down on the counter and went back to my dinner. I wasn't cold. I was just done. A few days later, I saw her again, by accident. I was at a Whole Foods, picking up a few things after work, when she appeared in the same aisle. She smiled like nothing had happened, holding a basket filled with the same almond milk she used to make fun of me for drinking. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Then she asked how I'd been. I told her the truth, peaceful. That word hung in the air like a verdict. She blinked, smiled awkwardly, and said, "You seem different." I just nodded. She didn't know that difference was the cost of everything she'd destroyed. That night, she texted again. This time longer. She said she couldn't stop thinking about me, that she'd made a mistake, that she finally understood what I'd meant by respect. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because some words don't deserve an audience anymore. Weeks passed. I started running again every morning, the sound of Nike shoes hitting pavement marking the start of something that finally felt like mine. I was sleeping better, eating better, living better. And yet, every now and then, I'd feel a shadow pass through my thoughts. Her voice, her laugh, the way she used to stand at the window with her coffee. Not because I missed her, but because she was a chapter one had finally finished reading. Then one night, I got an email. Short, honest, different. "I know you won't reply, but I wanted to say thank you for leaving. I needed to lose you to find myself." I read it twice, then closed my laptop. No bitterness. No closure needed. Just quiet acceptance. The next morning, as the sun broke through the window, I realized something simple but absolute. She wasn't my lesson. I was hers. She learned that silence isn't absence, it's consequence. And once you've felt it, it never leaves you. It had been almost 6 months since she left, and by then, my life had taken on a rhythm I didn't recognize, but one I finally liked. Mornings started with coffee from the same Starbucks near my office. Evenings ended with silence instead of arguments. It was strange how peace felt uncomfortable at first, like wearing something too new. But eventually, it started to fit. The noise that used to fill my days, her texts, her sighs, her constant need for attention, had faded into nothing. And in that nothing, I found myself again. Then came the message I didn't expect. Not from her this time, from a mutual friend. He said she'd been struggling, that she'd lost her job, that she'd barely left her apartment, that she'd asked about me. I didn't reply, because part of me knew that reaching out, even once, would pull me back into the gravity I'd fought to escape. Guilt is a tricky thing. It disguises itself as compassion. But I'd learned the hard way that not every cry for help deserves a response. That weekend, I went hiking alone. The trail was quiet, the air heavy with the smell of pine and rain. At one point, I stopped at a lookout. The city stretched below me like a memory I'd already outgrown. I thought about her, not with anger, not even sadness, just understanding. Some people teach you love, others teach you limits. She was both. A few days later, I got another message from that same friend. "She's moving away," he said. Said she can't stay in the same city anymore. I read it once, then deleted it. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood something deeper. I wasn't part of her healing story. I was the part she'd have to face alone. That night, I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker below. Somewhere out there, she was packing boxes, maybe remembering how it all fell apart. Maybe wondering if I'd think of her one last time. And I did, but not the way she'd hope. I thought about the man I used to be, the one who begged for love that only echoed back as silence. That man was gone, replaced by someone who no longer chased closure. As the night deepened, I took one last sip of my drink, closed my eyes, and smiled. She had her silence now, the same silence she once gave me. The difference was, I'd built peace inside mine. Hers would only echo. A few months after she moved away, I thought that chapter of my life was finally over. But life has a way of testing your peace, just to see if it's real. It happened one night when I was out with some coworkers. We were sitting in a dimly lit bar downtown, the kind of place where music hummed low and conversations blurred together. My phone buzzed on the table, and I almost ignored it until I saw her name. I hadn't saved her new number, but somehow, I still recognized the rhythm of her messages. She wrote, "I know you don't want to hear from me, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I stared at the screen for a while, not out of shock, but reflection. It had taken her almost a year to say what I'd once begged to hear. And now, I didn't need it. I didn't respond that night. I just tucked my phone into my pocket and let the noise of the bar swallow the moment. But later, as I drove home, her words echoed faintly in my mind. Not because I wanted her back, but because I realized how much I'd changed. The man she left behind would have replied instantly, desperate for closure. The man driving home that night understood that closure isn't something you get from someone else. It's something you give yourself. The next morning, I reread her message once more. "I'm sorry." Two simple words that used to mean everything and now meant nothing. I deleted it and went on with my day. Around noon, I got another text, this time from a different number. A mutual friend again. "She's been trying to reach you," he said. "She said she wants to make things right." I replied with one sentence, "Some things aren't meant to be fixed." That night, I sat in my apartment, watching the city lights fade through the window. The same Starbucks cup from that morning sat half empty on the counter. Everything felt still, balanced. I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by what I lost. I was defined by what I refused to lose again, myself. Somewhere, maybe in another city, she was probably looking at her phone, waiting for a message that would never come. And I didn't feel cruel for not sending it. Because sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone who broke you is to let them sit in the silence they created. It was almost a year to the day since everything ended when I saw her again. Not in person this time, on a screen. I was scrolling through Instagram late one night, half distracted, when her photo appeared on my Explore page. She was standing by the ocean, smiling, surrounded by new faces. At first glance, she looked happy. But then I noticed something behind the smile, the same emptiness I used to see when she thought no one was watching. It wasn't sadness. It was silence wearing makeup. I stared at the photo for a few seconds, then scrolled past it. But a strange calm washed over me. I didn't feel anger, or nostalgia, or regret. Just distance. Like watching a stranger play a role I used to know by heart. That's when I realized I'd finally broken free. Not from her, but from the version of myself that once needed her to see me. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I made coffee, threw on a hoodie, and went for a run through the quiet streets. The air was sharp, clean, alive. With every step, I felt more like myself. No more checking my phone. No more waiting for messages that would never mean anything. Just motion. Just peace. When I stopped by the pier, the same one where we'd once stood years ago, I watched the first light spill across the water. The world moved on. So did I. A few days later, I got one final email from her. The subject line read, "No response needed." It was short, simple, and honest. She said she hoped I was doing well, that she understood now what she'd done, that she didn't expect forgiveness. And for the first time, I believed her. Because it didn't sound like manipulation anymore. It sounded like acceptance. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. I just let it sit there, quietly, like a period at the end of a long sentence. Some things don't need to be rewritten. That night, as I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, the city lights flickering below, I realized what the story had been about all along. It was never about her leaving. It was about me learning how to stay, alone, grounded, unshaken. She once said I was too easy to forget. But the truth was, I just made it look easy to let go. A full year passed before I realized I hadn't thought about her in months. Not a fleeting memory, not a what-if, nothing. It was as if her name had dissolved somewhere between the miles I'd run and the mornings I'd learned to wake up without dread. I didn't mark the anniversary. I didn't need to. Some endings don't deserve candles or nostalgia. They just fade quietly, like fog burning off under sunlight. That day was ordinary. I was sitting at a small cafe near the pier, the same place where I'd once promised her forever. The same waves crashed against the shore, but they sounded different now. Softer. Honest. I sipped my coffee and watched the water shift with the wind. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity made me look. It was her. Not a message, just a missed call. No voicemail. No text. Just that. For a moment, I stared at the screen, waiting for it to ring again. It didn't. And somehow, that silence felt final. Like she'd called just to see if the line still existed. Maybe she wanted to hear my voice one last time, or maybe she was testing if I'd still answer. Either way, I didn't. I placed the phone face down on the table and let it sit there. Outside, the waves kept moving, same as always. Later that evening, I took a walk along the beach. The air was cool, the horizon glowing with the last traces of sunset. I thought about all the times I tried to fix what was never meant to last. How I'd begged for understanding, for validation, for love that was always conditional. And then I thought about how quiet life had become. Not empty quiet, peaceful quiet. The kind that fills you instead of draining you. She once said I was too easy to forget. But the truth was, I was never easy. I was consistent. I stayed when things were hard. I listened when she went silent. I gave her every chance to meet me halfway. She mistook that for weakness. What she never realized was that my silence wasn't surrender, it was evolution. As I stood there watching the tide pull away, I whispered something only the ocean could hear. I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. And for the first time, those words didn't sound like goodbye. They sounded like freedom.